Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Debrief. This one is a special episode all about the recent events this past weekend around Bishop Strickland, his removal, the reasons, and then maybe what is next. Let's bring Mike on and talk about all this. Hey, Mike, you've been busy. You've been traveling to Chicago and back, and then stuff blows up over the weekend. You should
Oh
travel.
my goodness, what a weekend. My wife and I had our first weekend away since 2011. We did the math. It's been 12 years and 1 month since the two of us got away without the kids. And the biggest news story in 5 years in the Catholic Church breaks on Saturday morning at 6 a.m.
Yeah.
And I was in Central Time. I was in Chicago, so it was 5 a.m. And I woke up to a ringing phone, and it was somebody sharing the news with me. So of all the days for that to happen. But I think it's a culmination of a lot of events which we have covered here on the Debrief, and which I have written about since late 2020, I think, on Where Peter Is. This has been an ongoing saga. Sadly, Bishop Strickland has continued along a particular progression, and I think made this fairly inevitable. But there are other issues that are involved in this, and it's a much bigger story than the social media campaign he's created for himself. It's a very important story about how he has governed the Diocese of Tyler, and we can't lose sight of that. And I think more will be revealed as the days and weeks and months go on about what exactly happened in his service as a bishop during his time in Tyler, and why that played a large role in his removal.
Fascinating. Okay, well, let's get into this then. Friends, welcome to The Debrief. It's our weekly show where we talk about news, questions, and controversies facing the Catholic Church. I'm Dominic de Souza, the founder of SmartCatholics.
And I'm Mike Lewis, the editor and co-founder of the website Where Peter Is.
So for those who are watching on YouTube, I'm pulling up a couple of slides here. So on Saturday morning, this statement was released by the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. Pope Francis has relieved the Most Reverend Joseph E. Strickland from the pastoral governance of the Diocese of Tyler. At the same time, the Holy Father has appointed the Most Reverend Joe S. Vasquez of Austin as the Apostolic Administrator, sede vacante, of the Diocese of Tyler. Later, the Metropolitan Archbishop of Galveston, Houston, Cardinal Daniel DiNardo, he released a statement discussing the apostolic visitation of the Diocese of Tyler. It says, as a result of the visitation, the recommendation was made to the Holy Father that the continuation in office of Bishop Strickland was not feasible. After months of careful consideration by the Dicastery for Bishops and the Holy Father, the decision was reached that the resignation of Bishop Strickland should be requested. Having been presented with that request on November 9th, 2023, Bishop Strickland declined to resign from office. Thereafter, on November 11th, 2023, the Holy Father removed Bishop Strickland from the office of Bishop of Tyler. So that's big news. Mike, what are your thoughts?
Well, it's interesting. He, as Bishop Strickland said in the past, he would not resign voluntarily. I have personal knowledge of at least 8 priests, I think closer to 10, of the diocese, of his own priests who stuck their neck out there and actually asked him to resign. But he was very stubborn. He said he was not going to do it. So the Pope took a very, very rare step to remove him. But once again, the fact that he's leaving, it really shouldn't surprise anyone. And looking on social media and, looking at the various articles that I've read on different websites, I'm surprised that people are expressing shock or asking why it would happen. This case was extraordinary. First of all, the rhetoric and the online behavior of Bishop Strickland just went so far over the line. Some bishops and priests have been just as outspoken as Strickland, but when you think of people like Cardinals Mueller and Burke, Vigano, Bishop Athanasius Schneider, well, the first three of those don't even have jobs in the church anymore. Athanasius Schneider, he is as we discussed, he's an auxiliary bishop in Kazakhstan. He's in an archdiocese that has something like 17 parishes and 10 priests. So he's not the one in charge. But this is a situation where the bishop actually has power and authority over people. And even though Tyler is a small diocese, at least in terms of the Catholic population, there are priests and people who are subject to his authority, to his jurisdiction. And that creates an extraordinary circumstance. Like as we've discussed in the past, there's the Veritatis Splendor community, which was a compound. It was supposedly a Catholic community that was going to be set up in the diocese. They had bought out a ranch and they were going to build homes. And apparently the project to some degree is still ongoing, despite a lot of scandals. He also brought in a couple of religious sisters that were highly controversial, one of whom, Sister Marie Ferriol, who was she was a French member of a French religious community and she was expelled from religious life for being essentially an emotionally and spiritually abusive leader, and for refusing to accept any kind of correction. There's Mother Miriam of the Mother Miriam, I forget her last name, but she's she has a daily radio show, and she's said all kinds of reactionary and conspiratorial things. She's accused the Pope of heresy. She's questioned his legitimacy. And this order had been kicked out of a couple of other places, and they found themselves a home in Tyler. I've heard from priests and parishioners of the diocese that the Tyler area was becoming a magnet for people who love and support Bishop Strickland. Approximately a family a week was moving in, and he was trying to reshape the diocese in this image that, I guess, of what he has become, but really it's what he has been either influenced or persuaded or brainwashed into believing and sharing and implementing. We've talked about Deacon Keith Fournier, who moved from the Richmond diocese down to Tyler. He's widely understood to be the brains behind the Strickland phenomenon. He's probably the ghostwriter of Strickland's various apostolic letters. I mean, this is something that is extremely unique, especially when you compare him to other bishops in the United States who maybe are critical of Pope Francis, or who are clearly working against Pope Francis's vision and goals. Maybe weren't taking the synod as seriously as it needed to be taken, maybe focusing on issues that Pope Francis didn't prioritize. But Strickland had gone an extra step. So, I mean, in a large sense, I'm relieved. To a large degree, I'm thinking, what took so long? On the other hand, just last week, the speech that Strickland gave at the Rome Life Forum in Rome, the full transcript was released, and in it, he read a letter from someone he described as a dear friend who was very much in love with the church and very much loved Pope Francis. And this friend called Pope Francis an usurper. He said that he had pushed the true Pope from his throne. And he also quoted Revelation 17, verse 11, which is about the eighth beast. And it's a line that is commonly used. It's a passage commonly used by Seventh-day Adventists and other anti-Catholic Protestants to describe the Antichrist. And then he praises this letter that his friend wrote. He said he needed to read it aloud, and then that everyone should listen to it. And then he powers through this thing that says all these horrible things. Said that everybody participating in the synod was a coward. He said that the agenda that Pope Francis was promoting was of Satan. I mean, if that letter didn't, I doubt the decision was taken after that letter was read aloud, but I think it would have been made if it had been, you know, if there was any question, that basically sealed the deal. And yeah, so it's just shocking to me that
Yeah.
people expressed surprise.
Yeah, that was. I remember I read that article when you posted about that. So let's keep going. Let's talk about some of the reasons then why he was removed. In his comments to the media following his dismissal, he told John Henry Weston of LifeSite News, quote, "I stand by all the things that were listed as complaints against me. I know I didn't implement Traditionis Custodes because I can't starve out part of my flock. I do it the same way again. I feel very much at peace in the Lord and the truth that he died for." What does this statement suggest to you?
Well, it seems to me that even though a lot of people on social media are saying we're not being given reasons why Strickland was removed, it sounds to me that he was given possibly a very long list of reasons, and that this is one of them. I had heard that he did not enforce Traditionis Custodes in any way, shape, or form. My understanding, in fact, was the opposite, that seminarians were it was being mandated that they learn the traditional Latin Mass or the extraordinary form. Um, and my guess is that this was just one of the items, though, based on what I've heard. There are stories of mismanagement. There are stories of around 2016 or 2017, um, when he was, 4 or 5 years after he became the bishop, he brought in some new people, some experts that he trusted to overhaul the diocese. And don't quote me on this because I don't know the details, but I'm sure they will be forthcoming. But there was a very large layoff of the people who had worked in the chancery for decades. And a lot of them were very dedicated employees. They were given no warning, no thank you party, no chance to defend themselves. Some of them sued the diocese and won, I believe, a hefty settlement. So that impacted the financial problems of the diocese even more. According to Father Timothy Kelly, whose open letter or his official statement on the removal of Bishop Strickland, there were then some of the people who were brought in to overhaul the diocese and mandated this. Some of them were fired, and the reason that he gave was because Bishop Strickland became threatened by them as well. I mean, there's more. I'm sure there's more on the list on top of the administrative things. There are obviously the public things, the derogatory statements he made against the Pope. He accused the Pope of having a program of undermining the deposit of faith in a tweet. He shared a video in which he described the Pope, in which Michael Matt, the person in the video, described the Pope as a diabolically disoriented clown.
That one blows me away every time.
And then on his radio show the next week, after he had been criticized for it, he said, "I didn't hear anything that wasn't true." He A year or two ago, he signed an open letter along with some other anti-Francis people accusing the Pope of teaching heresy in Desideravi, the apostolic letter on the liturgy by Pope Francis. And we've published 2 articles debunking that at Where Peter Is. It was basically a poor reading comprehension and a leap to a conclusion that made them think that it was heretical when they were referring to the wrong scripture passage and making leaps of logic that are totally incomprehensible. Signing that along with him was Deacon Keith Fournier. I don't think this guy's been a good influence on him because Strickland has become more and more extreme as every month passed. There was bad morale among the clergy. A lot of clergy had left the diocese, and I think his celebrity status didn't help him. I would say that there are a lot of incompetent bishops out there, is my guess. I've heard some of them described as totally disorganized, totally out of touch, don't know how to manage, bullies. But when you accuse the Pope of heresy and you say publicly, and you say that he has a program of undermining the deposit of faith, there's just no, you're going to get noticed by Rome, and they're going to take a close look at you. So that's just what happens.
So yeah, speaking of the celebrity status, then looking forward, I mean, there's been a wide range of responses to his removal. Do you have any sense of what he's going to do next, and then what his supporters are going to do next?
Well, I know for a fact that he is in Baltimore right now for the bishops' meeting. The first day is a closed door meeting. Since he's not a diocesan bishop anymore, I don't think he's technically a member of the bishops' conference. Now, I know emeritus bishops are invited to attend and they take part in the public sessions, but I don't know the bylaws. But certainly that would be pretty awkward, I would think, if I was in that situation. I mean, I got laid off from the USCCB 7 years ago, and I haven't set foot in one of those meetings, just anticipating it. So I'm surprised that he would show his face, a day or two after he got relieved of ministry. I know that there are protests that are planned. There are some in Tyler. He tweeted out that he hopes that the protests are peaceful and that people are well behaved. And then, as I said, many people are asking, like, they're saying that this happened for no reason, or, I mean, the automatic comeback is, why hasn't Pope Francis done anything about the German bishops, or why hasn't he done anything about Father James Martin? But I think there's something significant in directing your dissent and your lack of communion, and making the Pope at the center of your complaint. I mean, Father Martin has certain lines that he doesn't cross, for one thing, and he doesn't openly defy church teaching, but he also speaks favorably of the Pope. He doesn't undermine the Pope. He doesn't say that the Pope is a diabolically disoriented clown. And I don't think the German bishops are doing that either. Plus, with the German bishops, it's a college of bishops that's, I mean, it's a situation that's definitely very serious, and Pope Francis has complained or has criticized them to a large degree. But it's a matter of reining in a whole conference rather than, I mean, dealing with one bishop of a small diocese who is causing a ruckus in Catholic media. That's something that needs to be nipped in the bud, especially since he has pastoral authority over a diocese. In Germany, who's he going to appoint to replace these bishops? I mean, I think that's a more of a slow burning situation, but it needs to be handled in a completely different way. And then, one of the things that I tweeted and I alluded to earlier is that Strickland has gone so far over the line that he's dragged some of his supporters into the idea of, if you describe the Pope as an agent of evil, they're like, oh, well, that's just charitable criticism. Or he's been associating himself a lot with Michael Matt of the Remnant, who the Remnant newspaper, we discussed it last week. It was the same family that founded The Wanderer, and this was the part of the family that broke off and started their own paper because they opposed Vatican II and they supported Lefebvre and they didn't like the liturgical changes. So this was the radical one, and he was Bishop X at the Catholic Identity Conference in Pittsburgh a couple of weeks back in September, and he's giving this speech at the Rome Life Forum, and he's sitting right next to Michael Matt. I mean, this is a really kind of a surprising association, to say the least, for a mainstream Catholic bishop. And then finally, when he's reading this letter from this friend, and he's reading clearly sedevacantist rhetoric
So I got to ask, what's the point of him owning the letter, reading it as himself, and instead attributing it to this other friend who's apparently never going to be named? Like, it just seems like such an immaterial point. Is he trying to afford himself a degree of distance from the message, even though he went ahead and endorsed it wholeheartedly?
I think that there is an attempt to do some plausible deniability there. But the fact that he went there at all,
right,
is like, there are people who are parsing it, and somebody like I tweeted and I made clear that a speech in which the Pope was described as a usurper. I didn't write, and consciously did not write, that Strickland called him, because he was reading a letter and it wasn't necessary. And at a certain point, after the quote from Revelation, which apparently he didn't recognize, he said, I'm not very smart. Someone might have to explain that one to me. But it is possible he just, I mean, the most charitable interpretation I can give is that he skimmed it. It was from somebody he trusted, somebody he thought was really smart and a good friend, and didn't read it closely, and didn't pick up on the sedevacantism, and didn't have much planned for his talk. And so he decided to read this letter, and then got to those lines and interjected maybe one question. But afterwards, he praised the letter. He said it was challenging. He said that, it was for all of us, for all of our benefit, even though it was originally just sent to him. I also, the thing is, one of the things I sort of sensed, except he maybe didn't anticipate, was when he said that he rejected the Pope's program of undermining the deposit of faith, as opposed to saying Pope Francis is undermining the. But the thing is, those hairs are so thin.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that you're going to advertise it, the fact that you just said the program of, or, my friend's letter, doesn't exonerate him from the fact that he is promoting these messages, or that he's promoting the video, sharing the video that calls the Pope a diabolically disoriented clown.
Given all these receipts, is schism a real possibility?
Well, it's something I've been
and
warning
I guess
about.
For who? The question then might be for who might he take with him? Or
there is a very passionate group of defenders. There are people who have essentially already put themselves in schism. Some of the leaders of the cancel priest movement, people like Father James Altman. Vigano has already, for all intents and purposes, has removed himself from the communion of the Catholic Church. Some people have theorized that maybe he'll just decide to move to he's a local boy. He's from East Texas. Is he going to just move into the Veritatis Splendor community and start his movement there? There are plenty of people who, when we talk about John Henry Weston, and when we talk about some of the people like Timothy Flanders of 1 Peter 5, Taylor Marshall, his radio co-host Terry Barber, people like Jesse Romero, a lot of these people that are on the farthest fringes of extreme radical traditionalism, people like Peter Kwasniewski, they've all sort of alluded to sedevacantism, but haven't taken that final step, except for Altman. And I wonder if there's enough money, there's enough motive behind it, and if there is, if people are actually going to follow him. One of the things that I've sort of felt is that a lot of people over the past 6 or 7 years have flirted with sedevacantism. Some have jumped all the way, but there have been a lot of people who have been dabbling in the idea that Benedict's resignation was illegal, or that Francis has excluded himself from the papacy because he's uttered heresy. But I feel like for a lot of people, there is a fear of reprisal, a fear of the consequences. If you're a sitting diocesan bishop, or if you're a seminary professor, or if you are a parish priest in a diocese that has a parish, it could be very costly to dive feet first into a schismatic movement. You lose a lot of security. And if you're a lay person and you work for the church, like a professor or like a chancery worker, or a Catholic radio station or something like that, becoming sede vacantis could threaten your career. So then, but the thing is, if I've always sensed, if they were able to get a big enough group together and all agreed to make the leap at the same time, it might happen. So we'll see. I don't, I know that the last serious attempt, well, supposedly serious attempt at it was a open letter in 2019, I believe, signed by Aidan Nichols and John Rist and Peter Kwasniewski, and they only had like 19 names. The only one that was even vaguely familiar to mainstream Catholics at the time was Father Aidan Nichols, he's a famous author and a Dominican priest. They couldn't get bishops to sign on with them. They couldn't even get the SSPX bishops to sign on with them, because basically what they were saying was that Pope Francis had excluded himself from the papacy, had self-abdicated, and they were writing to the bishops to formally declare his removal. So who knows if this is going to work? Obviously, the rhetoric has gotten more extreme, but there's a good question of how strong their resolve is. Pope Francis isn't getting any younger. Maybe some of them think they can, maybe some of them will not do it because they think they can just wait it out for a couple of more years and see what the next Pope does.
Well, either way, this show won't be out of a job because they won't keep quiet about it. Social media has been a real thing for people wanting to, band together for better or for ill. So that's why I'm glad to have a chat with you once a week. What's going on? What did I miss over the weekend? So, Mike, thanks for the debrief. Links to all things are going to be in the description, friends, if you'd like to check that out. Conversation is brought to you from SmartCatholics.com. It's the free online community for millennials, creators, and learners. Join our private Where Peter Is group to ask questions, share insights, and suggest topics for next time.
And visit wherepeteris.com to read articles, commentaries, and spiritual reflections for and by faithful Catholics who support the mission and vision of Pope Francis.
Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss an episode. Please support Where Peter Is on Patreon so that Mike can continue bringing you this show. And thanks for joining us when it comes to news and controversies in the Catholic Church. Stay curious, informed, and engaged. God bless.